They were ready to hang her for a loaf of bread. Until one man said something no one could understand. The wind dragged dust across the main street, dry and restless, the kind that settled into your throat and stayed there. And right in the middle of it stood a woman with her wrist caught in a rough grip, her fingers still clutching half a torn piece of bread like it was the last thing tying her to this world, her dark hair falling across her face, hiding eyes that refused to beg, and all around them the town had already decided what she was worth. Voices rising sharp and certain, men shifting on their boots, women watching with that quiet approval that came from fear dressed as righteousness. Because she was Apache, and that was enough. It had always been enough out here, enough to turn hunger into crime and silence into guilt. And then Elias Turner stepped forward, slow, measured, like a man who didn't belong to the noise, his boots pressing into the dirt with a weight that seemed heavier than the moment itself, his shadow cutting between the crowd and the woman as if drawing a line. No one else could see, and for a second everything held, like the town itself was waiting to hear which way the wind would turn. And he didn't look at the rope someone had already brought out, didn't look at the sheriff pretending not to notice. He only looked at her, really looked, past the dust, past the accusation, to the way her hand trembled just slightly around that piece of bread. And when he spoke, his voice didn't rise, didn't fight for space. It simply settled over the street, quiet. Enough that people leaned in without realizing. "You don't steal to eat alone," he said, and the words landed wrong. Wrong enough to make a few brows tighten, wrong enough to stall the moment. And then he bent, picked up the rest of the bread from the dirt, brushed it once against his sleeve, and placed it back into her hand, slow, deliberate, like it mattered, like she mattered. "Bring your children too," he added. And that was when the silence broke in a different way, not with shouting but with confusion, the kind that crept in under the skin, because mercy didn't belong here, not like that. Not without a cost. And she didn't thank him, didn't move, just stared at him like he had spoken a language she wasn't allowed to understand. Like his words carried something heavier than kindness, something dangerous, because out where she came from, debts were not given lightly and never forgotten. And Elias stepped back as if the moment was already over, as if he hadn't just shifted the ground beneath everyone's feet. And one by one the voices faded, replaced by glances, by questions. No one dared to ask out loud, and she turned, slow at first, then faster, disappearing past the edge of the buildings with the bread held close against her chest, and the town exhaled like it had been holding its breath too long. But Elias didn't move, not yet, because something in the way she walked, in the way she never looked back, told him this wasn't finished, not even close. And when the sun finally dropped behind the ridge hours later, painting the land in that thin orange light that made everything feel older than it was, he noticed the tracks, not one set, not two, but many, circling just beyond his fence line, light, careful, patient, like eyes watching from the dark. And he stood there listening to the quiet, knowing without needing proof that somewhere out there, beyond the reach of his lantern, someone was deciding what his words were worth. The night did not settle easy over Elias Turner's ranch. It stretched thin and restless, the kind of darkness that listened back, and the lantern by his door burned longer than usual, its glow spilling across the dry ground where those tracks circled just beyond reach, too careful to be careless, too many to be ignored. And Elias stood there with his hands resting loose at his sides, not on his gun, never on his gun, because he had learned long ago that the fastest way to misunderstand a moment was to greet it with fear. And still, the air carried something heavy, something watching, something weighing his words from earlier like they were a promise or a mistake. And inside the house the table sat untouched, a loaf of bread still resting where he had left it, cut clean, uneaten, as if even he did not know yet what it was meant for. And the wind shifted once, bringing with it the faint scent of wood smoke and leather, distant but certain. And that was when he knew they were closer than the track suggested, closer than the darkness admitted, not hiding, just waiting, measuring him the same way he had measured that woman in the street. And he did not call out, did not reach for light or weapon. He simply turned his back to the night and stepped inside, leaving the door unlatched, not as an invitation, not as a challenge, just as truth. And hours passed slow, marked only by the creak of old wood and the quiet breath of a man who refused to pretend he was alone. And just before dawn, when the sky was still caught between gray and blue, he heard it. Not footsteps, not voices, but the absence of silence, the kind that gathers when many people stand still together. And Elias rose without hurry, pulled on his coat, and stepped outside into the cold edge of morning. And there they were, spread across the rise beyond his fence line, not scattered, not restless, but steady, a line of figures that did not need to move to be seen. And at the front stood the woman from the town, Naya, her posture different now, not hunted, not desperate, but something else, something resolved. And beside her, smaller shapes, children, more than he expected, each one holding something in their hands. And for a long moment no one spoke, the distance between them holding more weight than any words could carry. And Elias took one step forward, then another, stopping just short of the fence, close enough to see the dust on their boots, the stillness in their eyes. And it was the children who moved first, stepping past Naya, one by one, their small hands opening to reveal the pieces of bread he had given, untouched, unbroken further, carried through the night like something fragile, something important. And that was when Elias understood that what he had given was not what they had taken, and what they had brought back was not what he expected. And behind them, more figures emerged from the morning haze, not advancing, not threatening, just present, enough to turn a single act into something larger than one man or one moment. And Elias felt the weight of it settle, not as pressure, but as clarity, because out here, kindness did not disappear into the dust. It traveled, it returned, sometimes as gratitude, sometimes as something harder to name. And Naya finally stepped forward, her eyes meeting his without fear this time, without hesitation, and the silence between them shifted again, no longer uncertain, but unfinished. The distance between them held like a breath that no one wanted to release. And Elias Turner did not reach for words because he understood something now that the town never had. That silence could carry more truth than anything spoken too quickly. And the children stood there with their hands still open, each piece of bread resting untouched, not offered back, not refused, simply held as if it meant something more than food. And Elias let his eyes move from one small face to the next, seeing the same quiet patience, the same careful watching that had followed him through the night. And behind them the line of Apache men and women remained still, not tense, not ready, just present in a way that made the land itself feel shared for the first time since he had set his fence posts into it. And Naya stepped forward again, slow enough to show she was not hiding anything, strong enough to show she did not need to, her eyes meeting his without flinch or apology. And when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of something older than the town, older than his ranch. "They did not eat," she said, and the words settled between them like dust after a long ride. Simple but heavy, and Elias glanced once at the bread in the children's hands, then back at her, not questioning, just waiting, because he had learned that some truths did not need to be pulled, only given time to arrive. And Naya continued, her gaze steady. "Not because they were not hungry," she added, and there was a faint shift behind her, a ripple through the line of watchers, as if what she was saying mattered to all of them, not just to him, but because what you gave was not just food. And Elias felt that land deeper than anything she could have explained, because he had not thought of it that way, had not meant it that way. And yet here it was, returned to him as something larger than intention. And one of the children stepped closer then, no more than 10 years old, his boots too worn for his size, his eyes clear and steady, and he held out the piece of bread toward Elias, not in rejection, not in thanks, but in offering, as if asking him to see it the same way they did. And Elias did not take it right away. He let the moment sit, let the morning light grow stronger around them, revealing more faces in the distance, more figures standing just beyond the rise, not hidden, not advancing, simply witnessing. And when he finally reached out, he did not take the bread from the child's hand. He broke off a small piece instead, careful, deliberate, and placed it back into the boy's palm, keeping the rest where it was. And for the first time, a faint shift passed through the children, not quite smiles, not quite relief, but something lighter, something that moved through them like a quiet understanding. And Elias spoke then, his voice low, steady, "No one eats alone," he said, and the words did not belong just to him anymore. They hung there, shared, carried across the space between them, and behind Naya, one of the older men stepped forward, his presence calm but unmistakable, his eyes taking in Elias with the kind of measure that looked past what a man owned and into what he chose, and the air changed again. Not tense, not uncertain, but deeper, as if the moment was about to reveal something it had been holding back since the first step into the street. And Elias stood still, knowing without needing to ask that whatever came next would not be about Brett at all. The older man did not rush his steps, and that alone told Elias more than any show of force ever could, because a man who carried urgency often carried fear behind it. But this one moved like the land itself had agreed to hold him steady, and when he stopped just beyond the children, the space between him and Elias felt deliberate, measured in more than feet, measured in understanding, and for a long moment, he said nothing, his eyes passing over the fence, the house, the worn edges of a life built alone, then settling back on Elias with a quiet weight that did not accuse and did not forgive. It simply saw, and Elias did not shift under it, did not look away, because something in him recognized that this was not a moment for defense or explanation. It was a moment to stand exactly as he was, nothing added, nothing hidden, and the man finally spoke, his voice low, steady, shaped by years of choosing words that mattered. "You gave without asking who would repay," he said, and the sentence carried no praise, no challenge, only truth, and Elias let a small breath leave his chest, not relief, just acknowledgement, because that was all he had done, no more, no less. And behind the man, the line of Apache watchers remained still, but something in their stillness had softened, not broken, just eased, like a hand no longer clenched, and Naya stood slightly to the side now, her place no longer at the front, but not behind either, her eyes moving between Elias and the man as if she understood what this moment balanced on, and the children shifted closer together, their small movements careful, respectful, as though they knew they were part of something larger than themselves, and the man reached slowly to his side, not for a weapon, not for anything hidden, but for a small leather pouch that hung from a worn cord, and he held it in both hands for a second before stepping forward one more pace, close enough now that the morning light caught the lines of his face, the years, written there not as hardship, but as memory, and he placed the pouch on the top rail of the fence, not pushing it forward, not pulling back, just leaving it there between them, and Elias glanced at it once, noting the careful stitching, the way it had been kept, carried, valued, and then he looked back up, because whatever was inside mattered less than what it represented, and the man's eyes did not leave his as he spoke again. "There are ways to measure a man," he said. "Some use land, some use coin," and his gaze flicked briefly toward the distant hills, then back. "We use what he does when no one stands beside him." And the words settled into the space like something final, something that had been decided long before this morning, and Elias felt the weight of it not as judgment, but as recognition, the kind that did not ask him to be more than he was, only to remain it. And he reached out then, not to take the pouch, but to rest his hand lightly on the fence beside it, a small gesture, but enough to show he understood the line that had been drawn and the trust that now rested on it. And for a brief second, the wind moved through the space between them, lifting dust, brushing coats and hair, carrying the faint scent of bread and earth together. And in that quiet, unspoken exchange, something shifted that neither side would name out loud, because out here, the strongest agreements were the ones left without words, and the man gave a single nod, slight but certain, and stepped back, returning to his place among his people, leaving the pouch where it lay, and Elias remained where he was, his hand still resting against the wood, knowing that whatever had just been placed before him was not a gift, not a payment, but a beginning. The pouch rested on the fence like it had always belonged there, quiet, patient, waiting for a decision that did not need to be rushed, and Elias Turner kept his hand near it, but not on it, because he understood now that taking it too quickly would turn meaning into transaction, and that was not what this was, not out here where every gesture carried more weight than words ever could. And across from him, the line of Apache men and women held their ground without pressing forward, without stepping back. as if the moment itself had drawn a boundary that both sides chose to respect, and the children still stood closest, their small figures steady despite the long night behind them, each one watching Elias not with fear, but with something quieter, something that asked a question without needing to speak it. And Elias finally moved, not toward the pouch, but back toward his house, slow and unhurried, his boots leaving shallow prints in the dust that the wind would take by noon. And for a second it looked like he was turning away from all of it, leaving the offering where it lay, refusing to accept whatever had been placed before him. And a faint shift passed through the watchers, not alarm, not disappointment, just awareness, because they were measuring this choice as closely as they had measured the last. And Elias reached his door, pushed it open, and disappeared inside without a word, leaving the morning hanging in that same careful balance. And time stretched just long enough for doubt to take shape, just long enough for anyone watching to wonder if the line between them had been drawn too thin to hold. And then he returned, carrying something in both hands, not hidden, not guarded, just held the way a man carries what matters. And when he stepped back to the fence, the light caught what he brought. Simple things, nothing polished, nothing rare, a second loaf of bread, still warm from the early fire, a small tin cup, and a worn cloth folded tight. And he set them down beside the pouch, not closer to him, not closer to them, but exactly where the space had already been claimed. And for the first time since the morning began, the distance between them felt shared, not divided. And Elias looked up then, meeting the older man's gaze again, his voice low but clear. "If it is a beginning," he said, "it belongs to both sides." And the words settled into the air without challenge, without resistance, because they were not offered as a bargain, only as truth. And Naya's eyes shifted slightly at that, not surprised, but something close to it, as if she had expected many things from him, but not this, not the refusal to turn a moment of meaning into something owned. And behind her, one of the women stepped forward just enough to see more clearly, her expression unreadable but no longer closed. And the children looked down at what Elias had placed, the bread, the cup, the cloth, simple things that spoke without needing explanation. And slowly, almost carefully, the same boy from before stepped forward again, his small boots pressing into the dust as he reached the fence. And this time, when he held out his piece of bread, Elias did not pause. He broke off another piece from his own loaf and placed it into the boy's hand beside the first, not replacing it, not taking it away, just adding to it. And the boy's fingers closed around both pieces, his eyes lifting for a second to meet Elias's. And in that brief glance something passed between them that did not belong to either side alone, something that did not need translation. And behind him, the line of Apache watchers shifted again, not in movement, but in feeling, as if the ground itself had settled under a new kind of understanding. And the older man gave another small nod, slower this time, deeper, and the wind moved through the space once more, carrying the faint scent of bread, leather, and dust. And for the first time since the street, since the moment everything could have gone another way, Elias felt the weight of the morning lift just enough to breathe, not because the distance was gone, but because it no longer needed to be crossed in a single step. The boy stepped back with both pieces of bread held carefully in his hands, as if they carried something fragile that could not be seen. And the moment he rejoined the others, a quiet ripple moved through the children, not excitement, not fear, but a kind of recognition that settled deeper than either. And Elias Turner watched it happen without moving, his hands resting lightly against the worn fence rail, his eyes steady, because he understood now that whatever had begun here was no longer his to control, only his to honor. And the older man across from him shifted his weight just slightly, enough to show that the balance had changed again, not broken, not finished, but moving forward in a way that did not require force. And he turned his head once, just enough for those behind him to see. And in that small motion, something passed through the line of Apache watchers, a silent agreement, a decision carried without words. And one by one, slowly, deliberately, they began to lower themselves, not all at once, not in display, but in quiet sequence, each movement grounded, intentional, as if the earth itself had asked them to kneel. And Elias felt the breath leave his chest without realizing he had been holding it, because he knew what this meant even if no one had said it aloud. This was not surrender, not submission. It was respect given in a language the town would never understand. And he did not step forward, did not raise a hand. He simply stood there, letting the moment exist without trying to shape it into something smaller. And Naya lowered herself last, her gaze never leaving his. And when she finally bent her knee, it was not with hesitation, but with certainty, as if she had already chosen this long before the bread, long before the street, and the children followed, some slower than others, some glancing at the adults before committing, but all of them joining until the line that had once stood across from him now rested in stillness, grounded and quiet, and the land itself seemed to settle around them, the wind easing, the dust falling back to earth, as if even it recognized the weight of what had just been offered. And Elias finally moved, but not toward the pouch, not toward the bread. He stepped to the gate and unlatched it, the old wood creaking softly as it swung open, not wide, not inviting everything at once, just enough to remove the barrier that had defined the space between them. And he stepped back again, giving room, not command. And for a moment nothing happened, the stillness stretching just long enough to remind them all that this choice, like the others, could not be rushed. And then the older man rose first, slow, deliberate, and walked forward, crossing the line where the fence had once stood between them, his step steady, unguarded. And when he reached Elias, he did not reach for the pouch, did not reach for the bread. He simply stood close enough that the space between them no longer carried distance. And he gave a single nod, deeper than before, heavier with meaning, and behind him, the others remained where they were, not following yet, not pressing forward, because this was not about numbers, not about presence. It was about the moment between two men who had chosen something different when it would have been easier not to, and Elias met that nod with one of his own. Small, steady, and the silence that followed did not feel empty anymore. It felt complete, like a story that had found its center without needing to be told. The older man stood inside the open gate now, close enough that the dust between his boots and Elias Turner's had nowhere left to settle, and for a long moment neither of them moved, because some distances, once crossed, demanded stillness before anything else, and the quiet around them deepened, not empty, but full, like the land itself was listening to what would come next. And Elias kept his posture easy, not guarded, not welcoming in the way townsfolk understood it, but steady, the way a man stands when he knows there is no need to prove anything. And the older man's eyes moved once more, not over the ranch this time, but over Elias himself, as if confirming something already decided. And then he spoke again, his voice carrying just enough to reach those behind him without ever turning away. A door opened without being asked, he said, and Elias let the words sit, because he knew they were not about the wood and iron at his side. And behind them, the line of Apache watchers remained kneeling, their stillness now something quieter, something grounded, no longer waiting, but witnessing. And Naya rose slowly from where she had lowered herself, her movement deliberate, her eyes still fixed on Elias. And she stepped forward to stand just behind the older man, not speaking, not interrupting, but present in a way that made it clear she belonged to this moment as much as either of them. And the children remained where they were, holding their bread, their small forms steady, their silence no longer uncertain but respectful, as if they understood that what was happening now would shape something they would carry long after the morning was gone. And Elias finally reached for the pouch on the fence, not quickly, not hesitantly, but with the same measured care he had shown since the beginning, and he lifted it just enough to feel its weight, the soft give of leather, the quiet promise of whatever rested inside. And he did not open it, not yet. Instead, he turned slightly and set it down on the table just inside the doorway, leaving it in plain sight, not hidden, not claimed. And when he stepped back outside, the older man gave the smallest shift of his head, not approval, not command, just acknowledgement. And for the first time since dawn, one of the Apache men behind him rose and stepped forward, not crossing the gate, not approaching too close, but near enough to place something on the ground just beyond the threshold, a small bundle wrapped in cloth, simple, carefully tied. And then he stepped back again, returning to his place without a word. And Elias watched the bundle for a second, then looked up, meeting the older man's gaze, understanding that this was not an exchange, not a trade, but a continuation. And the older man spoke once more, quieter now, but no less certain. "You gave without counting," he said. "So we return without asking." And the words settled into the morning like something that had always been there, waiting to be heard. And Elias nodded once, slow, steady, and stepped forward to pick up the bundle, feeling its light weight, its careful wrapping. And he held it for a moment before placing it beside the pouch inside the house, not opening either, not yet, because he knew that what mattered was not what they contained, but what they meant. And when he stepped back out again, the sun had risen just enough to cast long shadows across the land, stretching from one side of the fence to the other, no longer divided, just connected by light. And in that quiet, shared space, the older man gave one final nod, and this time, it carried something different, something closer to trust than anything that had come before. The light stretched farther across the land now, thin and pale, touching the fence, the doorway. The figures still gathered beyond the rise, and Elias Turner stood in that quiet space between what had been given and what had not yet been understood, his hands empty again, his posture unchanged, because he knew that some things did not reveal themselves through urgency. And the older man watched him for a moment longer, his gaze steady but no longer measuring, as if whatever needed to be known had already been seen. And behind him, the line of Apache men and women began to shift, not in retreat, not in departure, but in a subtle loosening, like a held breath finally released. And one by one, slowly, they rose from where they had knelt, their movements quiet, deliberate, each person returning to their feet with the same care they had shown in lowering themselves. And the children followed, some glancing at Elias as they stood, others looking toward Naya, waiting for something unspoken to guide them. And she gave it with a single look, a small nod that carried more certainty than any command. And the children began to move, not toward the house, not across the gate, but back toward the line they had come from, each step light but purposeful, as if they were carrying something invisible with them now, something that could not be set down. And Elias watched them go, his eyes steady, his expression unchanged, but something in the way he stood had shifted, something quieter, deeper, as if he understood that what had happened here would not end with their departure. And the older man turned then, not away from Elias, but slightly to the side, enough to face both him and his people at once. And he spoke, his voice carrying just enough to reach those behind him without breaking the stillness. "A man fed hunger without asking its name," he said, and the words settled into the morning like a marker, something that would remain long after the dust had settled. And he paused, letting the silence hold it, then added, softer now, "So we leave him with something that does not fade." And Elias felt that before he understood it, felt it in the way the air seemed to still around the words, in the way Naya's gaze lowered, just slightly, not in submission, but in recognition. And then the older man stepped back, returning to the line, and for a moment it seemed as though that would be all, that the morning would close as quietly as it had opened. But then Naya moved again, stepping forward once more, alone this time, her pace unhurried, her posture steady. And when she reached the fence, she did not stop on her side. She stepped through the open gate, crossing the space Elias had left unclaimed, and she came to stand just a few feet from him, close enough that the dust between them no longer mattered. And she held something in her hands, small, wrapped in a strip of worn cloth. And for a moment she said nothing, her eyes meeting his with a clarity that carried no fear, no hesitation, only truth. And then she extended her hands, offering the small bundle without pushing it forward, without forcing it into his grasp, simply holding it where he could choose. And when Elias reached out and took it, her fingers released it without resistance. And she spoke, her voice low, steady. "This is not payment," she said, and the words carried more weight than anything that had come before. "It is memory." And Elias held the bundle for a second, feeling its shape, its quiet presence. And when he looked up again, she had already stepped back, returning to her place, leaving him standing there with something that did not belong to the past or the present, but to whatever came next. And the wind moved once more across the land, carrying with it the faint scent of bread, leather, and something else, something older, something that would not be forgotten. The bundle rested in Elias Turner's hands with a weight that did not belong to what it was made of, something quiet, something lasting. And he stood there for a long moment after Naya stepped back, the space between them opening again, but no longer empty, no longer uncertain. And the line of Apache men and women began to turn, not all at once, not in any hurried motion, but with the same calm purpose that had brought them there, one by one stepping away from the fence, from the house, from the moment that had settled between two worlds without needing to be named. And the children followed, their small figures moving in soft rhythm behind the adults, each still holding their pieces of bread, though now they no longer held them like something fragile, but like something understood. And Elias watched them go without calling out, without offering anything more, because he knew that whatever needed to be given had already been placed into the air between them, into the ground beneath their feet, and it did not belong to words anymore. And the older man was the last to turn, pausing once at the rise just beyond the fence, his silhouette catching the full light of the morning now, and he looked back, not long, not searching, just enough to mark the place. And then he gave a final nod, small and certain, before stepping away and disappearing with the others into the wide stretch of land that did not hold grudges and did not keep score. And the silence that followed was different now, not heavy, not waiting, but settled, like something had been completed without needing to be closed. And Elias remained where he was until the last trace of movement faded, until even the dust had forgotten their passing, and only then did he turn, walking slowly back toward the house, the bundle still in his hands, the pouch and the cloth-wrapped offering waiting just inside. And when he stepped through the doorway, the light shifted again, softer now, filtering through the worn boards and the quiet of a place that had never held so much meaning before. And he set the bundle down beside the others, not opening any of them, not yet, because he understood that whatever they contained was not meant to answer anything, only to remind. And he stood there for a moment, looking at the table, at the bread, at the simple things that had carried something far beyond themselves. And then he reached for the loaf he had baked that morning, breaking off a piece and holding it in his hand, not eating it, just feeling its warmth, its weight, the way it had changed everything without trying to. And outside, the wind moved again across the land, carrying the same quiet scent of dust and leather and something else that lingered just beneath it, something that did not belong to one side or the other anymore. And Elias stepped back out onto the porch, the piece of bread still in his hand, and he looked out across the open land where the fence no longer felt like a boundary, only a line that had once been necessary and now was not. And he took a breath, slow and steady, and without speaking, he set the bread down on the edge of the railing, not as an offering, not as a sign, just as something left where it might be needed. And he turned away, stepping back inside without looking again, because out here, some things did not need to be watched to be understood. And the wind carried on, quiet, endless, as if it knew that what had been given would not be taken back, and what had been shared would not be forgotten.